Alex had never imagined that inheriting a property could feel so overwhelming. The letter had arrived on a quiet Thursday morning, neatly folded and bearing the official seal of a law office. For years, the old family home had been a distant memory, a place Alex had only visited in childhood during long summer breaks. Yet now, with the passing of an elderly relative, the house, along with its small but well-kept plot of land, was officially theirs. Driving up the long, winding road that led to the neighborhood, Alex took in the scenery. The sun glinted off freshly painted fences, manicured lawns stretched like green carpets, and flowers in shades of violet, yellow, and white dotted the gardens. The houses, uniform yet charming, radiated a sense of calm and order. From the outside, it looked like the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happened. Alex parked in front of the inherited home, stepping out and stretching. The air smelled faintly of blooming roses and freshly cut grass. It was peaceful here, and for a moment Alex could imagine a life of quiet weekends, mornings spent reading on the porch and afternoons tending to the garden. But as soon as the car door clicked shut, a voice broke the calm. "Hello there, you must be the new owner," said a woman briskly, her tone both cheerful and commanding. She was dressed immaculately with a crisp blouse and tailored skirt, and her hair was styled perfectly. There was something about the way she stood, hands on hips, that made Alex feel like she was not just greeting a neighbor but evaluating them. "Yes, I just inherited the house," Alex replied, offering a polite smile. "I'm Karen," the woman said, extending her hand. "I've lived here for a long time and I like to make sure everything in the neighborhood stays in order." She gave a small, tight-lipped smile. "Welcome, of course, but I hope you'll understand, I take a keen interest in new properties." Alex nodded, sensing a subtle edge in her words. There was a warmth in her greeting, yes, but also something else. A weight of expectation, a watchfulness that made Alex instinctively adjust their posture. As Karen walked away, Alex stepped inside the house, the floorboards creaking slightly beneath their feet. The interior was a mix of nostalgia and potential. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, highlighting faded wallpaper that could use a fresh coat of paint. Dust motes floated in the air, dancing lazily as the breeze moved through the open windows. The kitchen was quaint, with old appliances that had clearly seen decades of use, and the living room held a fireplace surrounded by family portraits and decorative plates. Alex wandered from room to room, letting memories stir. Each space held a story, a fragment of the past waiting to be rediscovered. Despite the need for renovations, the house had a charm that made it feel alive, almost as if it were quietly welcoming its new owner. By the time Alex stepped back outside, the neighborhood seemed busier. Children rode bicycles down the sidewalks, dogs barked in yards, and neighbors waved from across the street. Yet amid the calm, Alex felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Turning slightly, Alex caught sight of Karen standing at the edge of her yard, arms folded, her gaze fixed on the house. She nodded ever so slightly, a small gesture that carried a silent message. She would be watching, and she would notice everything. The rest of the day passed with a mix of unpacking, exploring the property, and making lists of things to repair or improve. Even as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and pink, Alex could not shake the feeling that this new chapter would not be as simple as it first seemed. There was a rhythm to the neighborhood, a hidden energy that only revealed itself to those willing to look closely. By evening, as Alex sat on the porch with a cup of tea, the house quiet around them, the thought lingered. Inheriting a property was one thing, but living in it, in this carefully observed neighborhood, might be another entirely. Somewhere across the street, Karen's silhouette moved behind her curtains, and Alex caught her eyes, brief but sharp. She smiled politely, but the message was clear. She had noticed the new arrival, and she would not let anything go unseen. Alex sipped the tea and watched the sky darken, knowing that tomorrow would bring more than the soft peace of a sunset. It would bring challenges, discoveries, and perhaps a neighbor unlike any other. The next morning, Alex woke to the soft chirping of birds and the faint hum of activity from the neighborhood. Everything looked calm and inviting, yet a small part of Alex's mind lingered on the previous day's encounter with Karen. Something about her had unsettled them, though they couldn't quite put a finger on why. After a quick breakfast, Alex decided to take a walk around the property, hopping to stretch their legs and get a better feel for the neighborhood. The streets were quiet, lined with tidy homes and neatly trimmed hedges. The occasional wave from a neighbor greeted Alex, friendly but measured, like a polite acknowledgement of a newcomer who had yet to prove themselves. It didn't take long for Karen to appear. She stepped out of her house as if she had been waiting for Alex, wearing the same sharp outfit as yesterday and a clipboard in hand. "Good morning," she said brightly, but there was a subtle firmness in her tone. "I thought I'd check in and see how things are going with your new property. It's always exciting to see a house find its new owner." Alex smiled, trying to match her energy. "Good morning. Everything is fine so far. I'm just getting familiar with the house and planning a few improvements." Karen's eyes narrowed just slightly, though she kept her smile. "That's wonderful. It's important to keep things in line with the overall style of the neighborhood. Sometimes small details can make a big difference, you know?" She paused, tilting her head slightly. "Have you decided what to do about the mailbox yet? The HOA likes them uniform, and a few people have had questions about differences in style." Alex blinked. "Oh, I hadn't realized that was a concern. I suppose I can make adjustments if needed." Karen's expression softened just enough to seem encouraging, but Alex sensed the underlying tone. She was observing, cataloging, and already forming judgments. As they continued to chat, Karen pointed out other small elements: placement of potted plants, paint colors, even the type of grass along the sidewalk. Every suggestion was framed as helpful advice, yet each comment carried a subtle weight, as though Alex's every choice was under inspection. When Karen finally left, Alex exhaled, feeling a mixture of relief and frustration. It was one thing to have a neighbor who cared about the neighborhood's appearance, but Karen's attention felt intrusive, almost like a constant test. Determined not to be discouraged, Alex spent the rest of the morning assessing the house more carefully. They made a list of repairs, noting which areas needed paint, which parts of the garden required attention, and which sections of the lawn could benefit from fresh landscaping. The work was satisfying in a way that the previous conversation had not been. It reminded Alex why they had been excited about this property in the first place. By mid-afternoon, Alex was carrying a box of gardening tools to the backyard when movement at the edge of the property caught their eye. Karen was watching from her porch, arms crossed, as if cataloging every action Alex took. "Everything okay?" Alex called casually. Karen waved lightly. "Of course, just making sure everything is being done properly." Her tone was neutral, but her gaze was unwavering. Alex shook their head with a small smile, muttering to themselves, "Properly according to whom?" Despite the tension, Alex couldn't help but notice how well-maintained the neighborhood was. The trees were trimmed, the sidewalks clear, and each yard seemed to reflect the pride of its owner. Karen's dedication, though overwhelming, had clearly played a role in shaping this environment. As the day moved toward evening, Alex paused on the porch to take in the sunset, their hands covered in soil and their clothes smudged with dust. The calm beauty of the neighborhood contrasted sharply with the subtle unease that Karen brought with her every interaction. Alex knew one thing for certain: living here would require more than tending the garden or repainting walls. It would demand patience, diplomacy, and an awareness of the undercurrents that ran beneath the polished surface of the community. As darkness fell, the streetlights flickered on one by one, casting a warm glow over the quiet streets. Across the way, Karen's porch light illuminated her figure. She was seated now, clipboard in hand, seemingly working but still glancing occasionally toward Alex's property. Alex sipped a cup of tea, the cool evening air brushing against their face. The day had been productive, but it had also made one thing clear: Karen was not just a neighbor. She was a presence to be reckoned with, a subtle force in the neighborhood, and someone who would test the limits of Alex's patience and resolve. The sun disappeared completely behind the horizon, leaving the sky in shades of deep blue and purple. Alex smiled faintly, a mixture of determination and curiosity stirring inside. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new challenges, and perhaps the first moves in a careful, unspoken game that had already begun. The following morning, Alex awoke to the familiar sound of birds singing outside the window and the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Despite the peaceful exterior of the neighborhood, the previous days had made one thing clear. Living here would not be entirely simple. Coren's watchful presence lingered in Alex's thoughts, a quiet reminder that not everything was as calm as it appeared. After a quick breakfast, Alex decided to attend the weekly neighborhood gathering. The event was casual, a small assembly in the community park where neighbors exchanged updates, shared gardening tips, and occasionally discussed neighborhood matters. Alex hoped that participating would help ease the tension and provide insight into the unwritten rules of the community. As soon as Alex arrived, Coren was there, naturally positioned near the center of the group. She greeted Alex with a polite smile, her clipboard tucked under one arm. It was a subtle display of authority, as if her presence alone reminded everyone that she was the neighborhood's unofficial overseer. "Alex, welcome again," she said, her tone warm but carrying a hint of scrutiny. "I'm glad you could make it. It's always helpful to understand the rhythm of the neighborhood." Alex nodded, offering a friendly smile. "Thank you. I'm looking forward to meeting everyone and learning the ways things work here." The gathering began with neighbors exchanging casual updates, plans for landscaping, upcoming community events, and the occasional humorous story. Alex felt a sense of belonging, though Coren's attentive gaze reminded them that appearances were being observed and judgments were being made. Soon, Coren steered the conversation toward Alex's property. "I noticed you've been making some changes," she said, her voice light but pointed. "It's wonderful to see new ideas, but have you considered how certain elements might affect the overall harmony of the neighborhood?" Alex blinked slightly, taken aback by the question. "I've mostly been focusing on the garden and a few minor repairs," they replied. "I want to improve the property without disturbing the look of the community." Coren tilted her head, giving a small nod. "That's good to hear. Harmony is important here. Sometimes even small adjustments can have a big visual impact." She glanced around subtly, as if reinforcing her point to the other neighbors. Alex realized that this wasn't just a casual conversation. It was a test of perception, a way to measure how compliant, or at least observant, they were willing to appear. The subtle pressure made Alex more determined to approach their new life with a balance of caution and creativity. After the meeting, Alex returned to their property to continue the work. The morning sun illuminated the backyard, highlighting the areas that needed attention. Alex rolled up their sleeves, picking up a rake and moving toward the flower beds. The physical labor was grounding, a reminder that progress required hands-on effort and patience. Midway through the afternoon, Alex noticed movement across the street. Coren was observing again, this time from her driveway. She waved briefly, a gesture that could be interpreted as friendliness or subtle insistence on vigilance. Alex waved back, careful not to show any hint of irritation. Despite the tension, Alex began to appreciate the hidden rhythm of the neighborhood. Coren's vigilance, though frustrating, maintained a certain order. The streets were clean, the lawns were well kept, and the sense of community was tangible. Still, Alex knew that living here would require more than just participation. It would require diplomacy, strategy, and an understanding of the unspoken rules that governed interactions. As evening approached, Alex stood on the porch, surveying the work completed during the day. The garden was starting to take shape, the flower beds neat and vibrant, and the lawn freshly trimmed. There was a quiet satisfaction in the effort, a sense of ownership that extended beyond the legal papers and inheritance letters. Coren appeared once more, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of her porch light. She approached slowly, carrying a clipboard and a folder of papers. "Alex, I hope you don't mind," she said, "but I thought it might be helpful to go over a few observations about your property. Nothing major, just some details that could improve visual flow and neighborhood consistency." Alex nodded, prepared for the discussion. They listened attentively as Coren pointed out minor suggestions, aligning garden stones, trimming a small bush that partially blocked the walkway, adjusting the positioning of a decorative lantern. Her recommendations were precise, almost meticulous, and Alex realized that every word carried more than just a suggestion. It was a subtle assertion of oversight. By the time Karen departed, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky awash with shades of pink and purple. Alex leaned against the porch railing, reflecting on the day. The challenge was clear. Karen was not just a neighbor, but a force in the community, shaping interactions and influencing perceptions. Yet in the midst of tension, Alex felt a sense of determination rising. They had inherited more than a property. They had inherited a responsibility to navigate this delicate neighborhood dynamic, and perhaps to find a way to turn challenges into opportunities. As darkness settled over the street, Alex sipped a cup of tea, considering the subtle chess game that had begun. Tomorrow would bring more interactions, more observation, and the slow unfolding of the quiet battle that had already started. And Alex, for the first time, felt a thrill in the anticipation of what was to come. The next morning, Alex woke with a sense of quiet determination. The previous days had revealed just how observant and involved Karen was, and it had become clear that living in this neighborhood would require more than tending the garden or painting walls. It would require strategy, awareness, and a careful understanding of the subtle dynamics at play. After breakfast, Alex decided to take a closer look at the neighborhood records. There was something fascinating about property ownership, boundaries, and the intricacies of community regulations. As they examined public records, something unexpected caught Alex's attention. A curious note about a shared ownership arrangement in the estate of a long-forgotten family member. At first, Alex thought it was a mistake. They double-checked the documents, tracing lines of inheritance and legal transfers, and then realized the truth. They held partial ownership of Karen's property as well. A technicality in the family estate plan had given them a stake in her home, something Karen was completely unaware of. For a moment, Alex simply stared at the papers, absorbing the revelation. The situation was delicate. This was not about revenge or malice, but about balance. Karen had been so forceful, so meticulous in asserting her presence and influence, that it was only fitting that Alex now possessed a subtle advantage. The rest of the morning was spent in quiet reflection. Alex weighed their options carefully. They could confront Karen immediately, but doing so without preparation would risk conflict and tension that might spiral out of control. Instead, they decided to observe, to gather more information, and to plan a measured approach that maintained civility while ensuring fairness. Later, as Alex tended the garden, Karen appeared on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand. She waved politely as if nothing unusual had occurred. Alex returned the gesture, keeping their expression neutral. There was a thrill in knowing that the quiet power balance had shifted, even if Karen had no inkling of it yet. The day passed with small neighborhood interactions. Children rode bicycles down the street, neighbors exchanged polite greetings, and the hum of suburban life carried on. Alex carried out repairs and improvements on the property, painting the fence, planting new flowers, and adjusting the layout of the small backyard garden. Each task reinforced a sense of ownership and accomplishment. During a quiet moment, Alex glanced at Karen's house. It was tidy, precise, and well-maintained, the result of her own dedication and meticulous oversight. The thought occurred that Karen's strength was also her vulnerability. She was so focused on control and appearances that she had overlooked the potential for shared ownership within the neighborhood. As evening approached, Alex decided to visit the local library to research neighborhood rules, estate plans, and the history of property arrangements. They wanted to ensure that every action moving forward would be grounded in legality and fairness, leaving no room for misunderstandings or disputes. The stacks of records, dusty yet full of detail, offered insight into how small legal nuances could shape interactions and influence authority. Returning home, Alex felt a growing sense of confidence. The garden sparkled under the soft glow of the setting sun, and the freshly painted fence reflected the last warm rays of light. Across the street, Karen's porch light flickered on, casting her silhouette against the doorway. She moved with the same careful attention as always, completely unaware of the quiet advantage Alex now held. Sitting on the porch with a cup of tea, Alex reflected on the day's discoveries. Living in this neighborhood would be a challenge, but challenges could be managed. Karen's meticulous oversight had created a predictable rhythm, and now Alex had the opportunity to navigate it with intelligence and tact. The quiet thrill of possibility lingered in the air. Alex imagined future conversations, carefully worded interactions, and subtle moves that would maintain civility while gradually establishing a fair balance. They smiled faintly, realizing that the neighborhood had become a kind of chessboard, with each resident moving within defined patterns, unaware of the larger game unfolding. As darkness settled, the streetlights illuminated the tidy sidewalks and carefully tended gardens. Corinne's house glowed softly across the way, and Alex felt a surge of determination. The next steps would be crucial, careful, deliberate actions that respected the neighborhood while asserting rightful ownership. Tomorrow promised a continuation of the quiet dance between neighborly courtesy and strategic positioning. Alex sipped their tea, feeling both the weight and the potential of this new chapter. They had inherited more than a house. They had inherited an opportunity to navigate challenges with intelligence, patience, and subtle authority. And somewhere in the quiet of the neighborhood, Corinne continued her watch, completely unaware that the balance of power had quietly begun to shift. The following morning, Alex woke with a quiet sense of purpose. The discovery of their partial ownership in Corinne's property had opened a new door, one filled with possibilities that required patience and subtlety rather than confrontation. Today, they decided, would be about observation, strategy, and careful action. After breakfast, Alex set out to continue improvements on their own property. The garden needed additional attention, and a few new flower beds promised to brighten the yard. Each movement was deliberate, each adjustment carefully considered. Working in the soil, Alex found a sense of calm and focus that allowed them to think through the delicate dynamics at play with Corinne. From the corner of their eye, Alex noticed movement across the street. Corinne was standing in her driveway, clipboard in hand, observing once more. Her gaze was sharp but casual, as though she were merely taking in the neighborhood. Alex returned a polite wave, careful not to reveal any knowledge of the new advantage. Corinne nodded, apparently satisfied, and turned back to her own tasks. Alex had spent the morning making subtle improvements, straightening stones along the pathway, adjusting the placement of potted plants, and refreshing the mulch in the flower beds. Each task was not just about aesthetics. It was about establishing a rhythm, demonstrating care and attention, and quietly showing that they were a capable member of the neighborhood. By midday, Alex decided it was time to take a closer look at Corinne's property. Legally, they had the right to oversee certain shared elements, and there were small areas where improvement could benefit both properties without causing disruption. They approached the edge of Corinne's yard cautiously, noting details that might need attention. A section of the garden edging slightly uneven, a potted plant resting precariously near the walkway. Alex smiled to themselves. The idea was not to create conflict, but to maintain balance and fairness. By making small, careful adjustments, they could demonstrate stewardship, subtly reminding Corinne that the neighborhood's order was a shared responsibility. As Alex worked, they noticed a neighbor passing by. "Good afternoon, Alex," said Mrs., a kindly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. "It's wonderful to see you taking such care with your property." "Thank you," Alex replied, smiling. "I'm trying to learn the ropes, but it's rewarding work." Mrs. nodded approvingly and moved on, leaving Alex to continue. With every adjustment, the garden looked better, and the sense of quiet control grew. Corinne's property, carefully tended and neat, now also reflected the subtle influence of Alex's attention. By late afternoon, Corinne had noticed the changes. She stepped outside, clipboard still in hand, and walked over with a careful smile. "Alex, I see you've been busy," she said, her tone neutral but curious. "The yard looks different, in a good way, of course." Alex nodded politely. "I thought a few small adjustments might help with visual flow and overall balance. It seemed like a minor improvement, and I wanted to be helpful." Corinne's eyebrows lifted slightly. She said nothing, only observed, as if weighing the implication of Alex's actions. Alex realized that this subtle demonstration of capability and insight had shifted something in the dynamic. Corinne could no longer assert total control without recognizing Alex's competence. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Alex returned to their own porch, sipping a cup of tea and taking in the neighborhood. The streets were calm, the yards tidy, and the soft glow of streetlights created a peaceful. Across the way, Karen stood on her porch, eyes fixed on Alex's property. There was a new element of respect in her gaze, tempered by curiosity and slight unease. Alex allowed themselves a quiet smile. The day had unfolded exactly as planned. By acting with patience, intelligence, and subtlety, they had begun to establish a presence that was both respectful and firm. There had been no confrontation, no raised voices, only careful observation and thoughtful action. As evening settled, Alex reflected on the delicate balance of the neighborhood. Karen's watchful presence was undeniable, but the dynamic had shifted. For the first time, Alex felt a sense of quiet authority, a recognition that they could navigate this community with intelligence and tact. The garden glowed softly in the fading light, each flower and plant a symbol of careful planning and deliberate effort. Across the street, Karen's porch light flickered on, illuminating her figure as she watched from a distance. Alex sipped their tea and allowed themselves a moment of satisfaction. Tomorrow, the game would continue. Small, deliberate moves, quiet demonstrations of competence, and thoughtful attention to both properties would shape the neighborhood dynamic. Alex knew that patience, cleverness, and subtle strategy were the keys to establishing balance, and they felt a quiet thrill in the knowledge that the next steps would unfold with intelligence and precision. In the stillness of the evening, Alex realized that living in this neighborhood was more than managing property. It was about understanding people, patterns, and the delicate dance of observation and action. And for the first time since arriving, Alex felt truly in control. The next morning, Alex awoke to the soft golden light streaming through the windows. The quiet hum of the neighborhood was familiar now, but the events of the past few days had created a new rhythm in Alex's mind. They had learned that patience, careful observation, and subtle action were powerful tools, and the balance of the neighborhood was slowly shifting. After breakfast, Alex decided to spend the morning making minor improvements to Karen's property. They approached with care, mindful of boundaries and ensuring every move was thoughtful. Straightening a line of potted plants, adjusting the angle of a garden statue, and trimming a bush that leaned slightly into the walkway. Each action was small, precise, and deliberate. Across the street, Karen's presence became more noticeable. She stepped out of her house earlier than usual, packing the yard with clipboard in hand, her gaze flicking toward Alex's property repeatedly. Alex sensed that she had begun to notice subtle changes, but she did not yet understand their source. By late morning, Karen moved closer, pretending to water her flowers, but clearly observing Alex's movements with sharper focus. She spoke to herself quietly, muttering notes, and occasionally adjusting a plant herself, as if to assert authority over her domain. Alex paused, giving a polite nod. "Good morning, Karen. I hope you don't mind me taking care of these small adjustments. It seemed like they might benefit both of our properties." Karen's lips pressed together and her eyes widened slightly, betraying a flicker of surprise. She paused, then spoke carefully. "I hadn't considered that perspective. Well, thank you, I suppose. I appreciate attention to detail." The subtle change in her tone was telling. Karen had begun to recognize that Alex was not just following instructions or reacting. They were acting with purpose, and their influence could not be ignored. A quiet unease settled over her demeanor, and Alex could sense her internal calculations as she tried to reconcile the changes with her expectations. Throughout the afternoon, the neighborhood seemed to notice the shift as well. Mrs., passing by with her small dog, glanced at the improvements and gave Alex an approving nod. "It looks wonderful, Alex. You've done a fine job." "Thank you," Alex replied with a smile. "I'm learning as I go." Karen, however, continued her careful scrutiny. She lingered in the background, occasionally making small adjustments or checking her clipboard, clearly aware that Alex had started to assert a quiet influence. Her movements became slightly more hurried, almost defensive, and it was evident that the balance of authority she had maintained for so long was beginning to feel less secure. By late afternoon, Alex decided to step back and simply observe. The garden was neat, the flower beds well arranged, and the overall appearance of both properties had improved. Corinne's gaze lingered on Alex, her posture slightly tense, her mind clearly working to understand how this shift had occurred without direct confrontation. As evening approached, Alex returned to their porch with a cup of tea. Across the street, Corinne remained on her porch, seemingly occupied with her clipboard but clearly distracted. Her movements were more measured now, and there was a flicker of something new in her expression, an awareness that Alex had quietly established a presence that could not be dismissed. Alex allowed themselves a small smile. The dynamic had changed. Corinne's watchful authority, once absolute, was now balanced by subtle skill, patience, and strategic action. There was no need for words or confrontation. Simply careful, deliberate work and thoughtful attention had begun to shift the neighborhood landscape. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep orange and purple. Streetlights flickered on one by one, illuminating the tidy sidewalks and carefully maintained yards. Across the way, Corinne's porch light glowed softly, casting her figure into sharp relief. She glanced toward Alex's property once more, a mix of curiosity, respect, and unease in her eyes. Alex sipped their tea, reflecting on the day's quiet victories. Patience had paid off, subtle action had created change, and the neighborhood dynamic was evolving. Corinne had begun to realize that her previous sense of control was no longer absolute, and Alex now held a position of quiet influence, earned not through confrontation, but through intelligence, care, and careful strategy. As darkness settled over the neighborhood, Alex felt a sense of satisfaction and anticipation. Tomorrow would bring more observation, more careful adjustments, and perhaps the first hints of acknowledgement from Corinne. The quiet balance was shifting, and Alex was ready to navigate the unfolding changes with tact, subtle authority, and confidence. Somewhere across the street, Corinne leaned back on her porch chair, her clipboard set aside for a moment. For the first time, she considered the possibility that Alex was more than just a new neighbor. They were a thoughtful presence, a force to be recognized, and someone who could influence the neighborhood in ways she had not anticipated. The next morning, Alex woke to the soft hum of the neighborhood coming to life. Birds chirped, leaves rustled, and distant voices floated from other yards. But the tranquility was deceptive. The subtle tension between Alex and Corinne had reached a point where the air itself seemed charged with anticipation. Today, Alex knew the delicate balance they had been cultivating would begin to reveal itself in a more direct way. After breakfast, Alex took a walk around their property, carrying a clipboard and a notebook. They noted which areas of the garden could be enhanced further, which plants needed slight adjustments, and which elements of the yard could be subtly aligned to create a more harmonious look. Every action was deliberate, measured, and infused with quiet confidence. From across the street, Corinne emerged. She moved with a sense of purpose, her clipboard clutched tightly. Her eyes immediately found Alex, and there was something new in her gaze, a flicker of realization, a hint of uncertainty. For the first time, she appeared slightly unsettled, as though the neighborhood dynamic she had long controlled was shifting beneath her feet. "Good morning, Alex," Corinne called, walking over. "I see you've been very busy. The garden looks improved." "Good morning," Alex replied calmly. "Thank you. I've been making a few small adjustments just to ensure everything flows nicely." Corinne paused, her expression careful, measured. "Yes, I see that. You've clearly been paying attention to details. I must admit I hadn't expected such thoughtful work." Alex smiled politely. "I believe that attention to detail benefits everyone. A property reflects the care of its owner, and that contributes to the neighborhood as a whole." Corinne nodded slowly, and for a moment there was silence. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, as if both were aware that something unspoken was about to shift. Alex took a deep breath, knowing that the time had come to reveal a crucial piece of information. "Corinne," Alex began, their voice calm and steady, "there's something important I think you should know." Corinne tilted her head, curiosity and apprehension mingling in her expression. "Oh, and what might that be?" Alex held her gaze evenly. "I recently discovered that due to a family arrangement, I legally have partial ownership of your property as well. It's a quiet detail in the estate records that went unnoticed until recently, but it's legitimate and binding. For a brief moment, Karen's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Her eyes widened, a mix of shock, surprise, and disbelief crossing her face. She raised her hand, almost to protest, but no words came out immediately. You what? She finally managed, her voice tight. Alex nodded calmly. It's true. This doesn't mean conflict or confrontation, but it does mean that we now share responsibility in ways that weren't previously obvious. My goal isn't to challenge you, only to ensure fairness and balance. Karen took a step back, adjusting her posture as she processed the revelation. Her clipboard wavered in her hands, and for the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. The meticulous confidence she had displayed for weeks now felt brittle. Alex continued, gently but firmly. That's why I've been making subtle improvements. They benefit both properties and the overall harmony of the neighborhood. I hope you understand that these actions are thoughtful, not intrusive. Karen's shoulders sagged slightly, and she let out a long breath. The sharp edge in her eyes softened as she realized that Alex had acted with intelligence and respect. For weeks, she had believed herself to be the uncontested authority, but Alex's calm, measured approach had shifted the dynamic without aggression or conflict. I didn't realize, Karen said finally, her voice quieter, tinged with humility. You've been acting responsibly. I suppose I misjudged the situation. Alex nodded. It's natural to want to maintain order, especially in a place you care about deeply. But fairness and collaboration are just as important. We can ensure both properties and the neighborhood thrive without tension or oversight conflicts. Karen glanced around, noticing a few neighbors observing from a distance, their expressions a mix of curiosity and admiration. Alex had not only handled the situation gracefully, but also demonstrated thoughtfulness that the neighborhood respected. Finally, Karen set her clipboard down and extended a hand, this time without the previous tension. Thank you for explaining. I think we can work together from here. Alex shook her hand, smiling. I agree. Together we can maintain the neighborhood's charm while respecting each other's space and responsibilities. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the tidy streets. For the first time, a sense of equilibrium settled over the neighborhood. Karen, once a watchful and controlling presence, now understood that influence could be balanced with respect, patience, and intelligence. Alex returned to their porch, sipping a cup of tea, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The subtle chess game had reached a turning point, and the balance of the neighborhood had been recalibrated without hostility, without confrontation, only through strategy, care, and thoughtful action. Somewhere across the street, Karen watched from her porch, a new awareness in her eyes. She had learned that oversight alone was not enough and that patience and fairness could shape outcomes in ways she had never anticipated. The neighborhood, for the first time in weeks, felt like a space of shared understanding and mutual respect. The morning after the revelation, the neighborhood seemed quieter, as if everyone had collectively held their breath the day before. Alex woke with a sense of calm and purpose. The previous confrontation had resolved more than just a personal tension. It had shifted the rhythm of the entire block. Karen, once untouchable in her vigilant oversight, had now come to recognize Alex's fairness, intelligence, and thoughtful approach. After breakfast, Alex stepped outside to survey the yard. The garden was thriving, the flower beds vibrant, and the freshly painted fence gleamed in the morning light. Across the street, Karen emerged from her home, carrying her clipboard, but this time her movements were relaxed rather than tense. She paused to nod toward Alex, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than scrutiny. Alex smiled politely. Good morning, Karen. It looks like a beautiful day. Karen returned the smile, softer this time. Yes, it is, and I must admit the garden looks wonderful. I appreciate your careful work. Thank you, Alex replied. I think we both want the neighborhood to look its best, and collaboration seems the most effective way. Karen nodded thoughtfully. For the first time, she appeared to understand that authority did not always come from control alone, but from respect, cooperation, and mutual consideration. She glanced around, noticing neighbors passing by and exchanging friendly waves. The energy of the block felt different, lighter, more harmonious, more united. The day unfolded with small gestures of collaboration. Alex made subtle adjustments to both their property and Karen's, always within legal bounds and done with care. Karen, now more receptive than ever, began to suggest ideas in a cooperative way rather than in a commanding tone. Together, they straightened flower beds, repositioned garden accents, and aligned the visual flow between the properties. Each task was performed with a sense of shared purpose. Neighbors passing by noticed the change immediately. Mrs. waved with approval. "It's wonderful to see both of you working together. The neighborhood has never looked so harmonious." Alex nodded, feeling a warm sense of satisfaction. The subtle tension that had hung in the air for weeks was gone, replaced by mutual respect and cooperation. The quiet chess game that had begun with careful observation and measured action had reached a natural conclusion. By late afternoon, Alex and Karen stood side by side on the sidewalk, surveying the improvements. Karen finally spoke, her tone reflective. "I see now that oversight is important, but it's not everything. Patience, understanding, and thoughtful attention can achieve just as much, if not more." Alex smiled. "Exactly, and sometimes the best results come from balance rather than absolute control." Karen chuckled softly, a sound that was lighter than anything Alex had heard from her before. "I suppose I have learned a valuable lesson. You've handled everything with tact and fairness. I admire that." As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky with deep oranges and purples, the neighborhood basked in a peaceful glow. The streets were tidy, the yards immaculate, and the houses seemed to shine with care. For the first time since Alex's arrival, there was a sense of true equilibrium. Alex returned to their porch, sipping tea and reflecting on the journey. What had started as a simple inheritance had evolved into something far more meaningful. It had been a test of patience, strategy, and subtle influence. Through careful observation, intelligence, and thoughtful action, Alex had navigated the complexities of a community dynamic and emerged not only unscathed, but respected. Across the street, Karen sat on her porch, her clipboard set aside, and watched quietly. There was no tension in her gaze, only a new awareness of the value of collaboration and mutual respect. The subtle rivalry that had marked the first days of Alex's arrival had transformed into a partnership built on trust and understanding. The evening grew cooler and the streetlights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. Alex took a deep breath, savoring the quiet satisfaction of the day. The challenges had been met, the lessons learned, and a balance achieved that promised harmony for the future. In the distance, the laughter of children playing mingled with the soft rustle of leaves. The neighborhood, once a place of quiet tension and observation, now felt alive with a sense of shared purpose and community. Alex knew that maintaining this balance would require attention and care, but it was a challenge they welcomed. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Alex leaned back on the porch, sipping the last of their tea. The house, the garden, and even the street beyond reflected the results of thoughtful planning, patience, and quiet strategy. Across the way, Karen's porch light glowed softly, a silent acknowledgement of mutual respect. For Alex, the inherited property was no longer just a home. It was a symbol of opportunity, intelligence, and subtle triumph. The story of the neighborhood, the challenge posed by Karen, and the quiet victories achieved would remain a testament to the power of patience, fairness, and careful action. And as night fully settled, the streets quieted once more, the sense of balance and harmony was complete. Alex had not only inherited a house, but had cultivated respect, fairness, and a peaceful rhythm in a neighborhood that now felt truly like home. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the next mystery on HOA Hunter Stories.